As we sleep soundly in our beds, unaware of the night sky's secrets, otherworldly craft glide silently overhead. The government shrugs, claiming ignorance, but whistleblowers have stepped forward, revealing a startling truth. These are non-human vessels, meanwhile cocooned in the safety of our homes, oblivious to the cosmic drama unfolding above. Two brothers roam the darkness in their RV-turned-mobile command center, a high-tech hub for uncovering the unknown. Nicknamed Nightcrawler. Outfitted with cutting-edge and custom-built technology, they scan the heavens, capturing data, video, and images, irrefutable proof that we are not alone. They are the UFO hunters. They are the Tedesco brothers.
You know what's tough to hear is the last congressional hearing. They had Tim Gallaudet, Lou Elizondo, and was it Michael Schellenberger and the guy from NASA, Michael Gold, I think.
Yes, Michael. That's funny because I never heard of the guy before this.
I never. Yeah, you know, I briefly came across his name and I realized he was with that study group, the NASA study group. We were hoping Tim Gallaudet would say something positive. He was asked a question about, is there any current hotspots by Nancy May? She asked him, is there any current hotspots on the coast of the United States that you're aware of that's happening now? And he says, nothing credible. And we just talked to him about it. You know, it bothered us because we had this long conversation with about what was happening in Long Island. We had this instrumented platform. We weren't just looking with our eyes. It was completely instrumented. He knows that. He also read our paper. And he just kind of folded, which it was bothersome. It's like, that doesn't help us if, you know, you're not going to cover that. You know?
Yeah. Like, why ask if you're not going to?
Yeah. There's nothing sufficiently credible, he said. I don't know, if it's not credible what instrumented means and several people, you know, technically making these observations with a platform out there, then what is? You know? Now let's still waiting for Harvard. I don't know.
What's his name? Gary Nolan. I think Gary Nolan.
Gary Nolan. Yeah. He's another guy. We had him out there for 3 hours. He was out there, you know, he wanted to visit. We were showing him our equipment. Our platform was early on when we were doing it, but we were starting to see things. And he said he was very impressed with what we had and what we were doing. Then he kind of backed off. We had some meetings from him before that, you know, for a while. Then he backed off for a while. And then he's making comments like on Twitter about, he's working with the Skywatcher group. And he says what they're doing is comprehensive, the best that's out there. He says that, and he mentions our name, the Tedesco brothers are allegedly seeing things in their area, but nobody can touch what Skywatcher's doing. And I said, it's like, come on.
Yeah, but the fact that he called. I mean, you know, if you're not going to call anybody, that's one thing. But he called us out specifically, and I basically responded to it on Twitter. You know, and I said, you know, it's. I said I disagree. I said, you know, we have a lot of data out there, and you know, I was a little taken back, and I said I was taken back by the fact that, you know, that he had, you know, publicly called us out. You know, I mean, you know, what makes us different than any other research group out there? And you're, you know, calling us out and saying that your data is better than our data.
Well, it was an opinion. It wasn't a fact-based. And you know, I've seen Skywatch, what they're doing. They use Jeeps. They have portable equipment they bring on, but it's nowhere near the platform we have and the amount of time we put out there. You know, and so I think that comparison is ridiculous.
Well, Jake Barber actually reached out to you.
You know, and I don't. It's not, I said that. I think I said that on your post when you made that. I said, I'm no disrespect to Jake Barber, but the fact is, the platform that we used out there, basically, it's the only one being used out there. There's nobody else has got anything similar. Not even Harvard, their fixed platform. As even though Avi says that they got the best that's ever been developed. You know, that's an absolute nonsense.
I know that I saw him post. They were looking for producer, editors, shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what they're planning to do. You know, are they? What the fuck is the word? Here we go. Are they trying to make it?
I think they're trying to package themselves into a for publicity with a documentary or a TV series or whatever he's looking for. I think he said that Netflix might be doing a mini series on them.
Yeah. I'm Jake Barber.
Yeah.
Or Skywatch.
On Ivy Low, but I think Jake Barber also has a.
Okay.
I think he's having a series or a mini-series come out too, right?
Yeah.
Or no, Gary Nolan, I guess. Gary Nolan says now he's part of he's the scientific advisor for the Skywatcher project, and he's going to design their system.
He's going to personally
design their system. And that's kind of funny because Gary's a geneticist. I don't know. I haven't seen anything in his background says he's an engineer.
Sucks for them, man.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're going to hire engineers, I guess,
Yeah. Well, it kind of calls some things into question. You would try to stay out of that realm, because, you talk to the doctors don't agree with them. Gerald, we have a doctor on our
we have a
team.
We formed what's called a subject matter expert.
SME, SME people. And, this guy's
he's a doctor. He's an emergency room physician. He's Dr. Jonathan Landry. He's in Connecticut, well versed on the UFO history. Very smart guy, great background, public health, science, everything. And we were talking about this, and we got more with him. Went further with him than anything that Gary Nolan has covered.
Good, but his question was, he of course he doesn't want to get involved in it. He goes, me as a medical doctor, and he says, I look at radiology reports and stuff like that. He goes, I don't feel I'm qualified to give that information.
Well, that's because
and Gary Nolan as a geneticist, he goes, he certainly isn't qualified.
No, because Gary Nolan's he goes on Ross Coulthart, and Ross Coulthart said he's the medical advisor for Jake Barber. He's looking at all his medical records and he's looking at the medical records of people the CIA produced that claim they had bioeffects from these being in close proximity to these objects.
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking about it, saying Gary Nolan's a geneticist. I looked at his CV, and there's nothing that says he's a medical doctor. So I'm wondering how he can make clinical evaluations on people without being a medical doctor. If you said a lab test that did some genetic profile, I'd say, yeah, you could look for biomarkers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But if you're saying he's examining them or look at their medical records and diagnosing their condition, he's out of his field. And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to call that out.
Yeah.
It's just not. He's on Ross Coulthart making those claims about radiation poisoning. He's not qualified.
Unless he had a team of experts on his own team of experts.
Well, he said
he reached out to a team of experts.
Well, yeah, but then he's got to say,
I'm looking at this stuff with a team of people.
Right.
We're analyzing the data and so forth.
Right.
Not
Gary Nolan looking at it. He said one person, he said a rheumatologist that looked at it after, and there's no rheumatology report. Okay, where's the rheumatology report? And Gary says he personally looked at the MRIs. Well, how does Gary read an X-ray or an MRI? He's not a radiologist. It's like a medical doctor would have a hard time reading.
I mean, that's basically what this medical.
And he makes this interpretation called he's called the caudate putamen structure in the brain at the midbrain is thickening. How did you determine that?
And that's exactly something that Mick West would look for to debunk.
Mick West would tear him apart.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like, he calls it everybody else. It's got to be. That's why the soul foundation. He wants to make this much more professional and science based. All right, well then you can't make statements like that. That's it's nothing but opinion.
I mean, if it was brought into court and that sort of thing, and
it would fail.
I don't think it would easily align with the specialty that you need to address those.
No, he should have said I work on a medical team. They're looking at it, and so we got these doctors. That's fine, but he never says that. He says Gary Nolan looked at it. Gary Nolan's not qualified to look at it. So that data doesn't mean anything. To me, it doesn't.
And we're not we're certainly not discredit. He's
But he's going to call us out.
He's earned certain titles. He's a PhD. He's the head of that department at Stanford University, that sort of thing. And he's got a good solid,
in genetics
and biology, solid base. But it's these other things, these other, very, like cavalier areas that you really need to look out to other experts. We don't do it. I'm an engineer in certain categories, but I'll look out to other engineers, a spectrum engineer or something like that, and say, wait a minute, that's out of my pay grade.
Well, you need a clinician into that. You know, like I said, my first degree, I was in public health. I had a bachelor's degree in public health, and I have a clinical background. I studied laboratory science, you know, and he's talking about things, you know, that you need an interpreted by either a radiologist or a medical specialist in that area. You know, he's talking about these people. He's looking, he's trying, you know, he's putting a lot of technical stuff in there. This blood dyscrasias that he says these people have, which is just abnormalities in the blood forming organs. But he doesn't say what they are, and he doesn't say what the abnormal blood counts and, you know, well, the specific things that would show radiation poisoning. He's talking about things. He says he looked at everything and he narrows it down to radiation poisoning. Well, I don't know. From what I heard, it could be anything. Those guys are out in Afghanistan and Iraq. They're exposed to the oil fields burning, and the solvents and all the chemicals they use to clean the vehicles. This ordnance that get exploded that have effects. You know, he's calling out lesions. All those things could be contact dermatitis, or it could be a toxicity from some. Blood to cell dyscrasias can be a toxicity from heavy metals to any solvent, some kind of toxic solvent. It doesn't have to be radiation.
So who's he looking at, right? Who are these people he's looking at?
He doesn't give the names. He says there was at least a dozen people or more that the CIA gave him records for to look at. And then he says Jake Barber. Then he looked at old Jake Barbers for medical records since 1990 something or 91 or whatever it was.
These are supposedly people that came in contact with...
Yeah, came into contact with something, NHI or an object or something, you know. And he says he sees signs, definitive signs of radiation sickness or poisoning. And I don't see it. I see these guys, I don't know what their work was. A lot of it was classified. They could have came in contact with anything. And it would all cause the same abnormalities he's claiming he sees. Now, everything he brought up, that he talked about the alopecia, migrating alopecia, which is loss of hair. Well, if I spill that chemical or something, contact dermatitis, I'm not going to grow hair there. So is it radiation? No.
In that case, I might have headbutted an alien.
It's like, you know, you can't just say that. You know, he can get away because he's Gary Nolan, nobody's questioning, but it can be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just not. He's talking about also, you know, comparing us to other people and throwing out opinions and put our name in there. And he did, like I said, we were virtually invited to the Soul Foundation, the first conference, which we attended, you know, virtually. And then the second one, we didn't get an invitation. But he gave an invitation to people like Mitch Randall, who's also an engineer. And he's developing a passive radar system, which has been developed now for 4 or 5 years. It's at a prototype stage. But they felt that was much more important than us having a working platform that's out there collecting data. So why weren't we invited, you know, the second time? He knows all about our work.
Especially that we have just completed some
we published
papers in the open.
We just published more papers, you know.
Applied science.
And Gary says he won't look at anything unless somebody publishes a paper. Okay, well, we have 2 papers we personally published, and then we have 2 other papers that we're co-authors on. And then there's the 5th paper that we're cited on. So what's the issue? Why aren't we raised to the level of importance to be speaking or even acknowledge that you're the Soul Foundation?
And there's the curiosity side of it too, though. I mean, you know, most people. I mean, I know, you know, Ross Cohart brings it up all the time, is, you know, that these guys are working with the FBI and that sort of thing, federal agency. You know, of course, is that, you know, we can't talk a lot about it, and we're not read into it yet. I mean, but I would think that you'd have some curiosity as to why they would be interested in our work. Why were they interested?
Yeah, why is the FBI coming to us?
That we're looking at the stuff on the coast.
They're not going to Galileo. They're not going to. The Gary. I think they asked for Gary's name, but I don't know what Gary's doing with them.
Never approached them. But they were being very transparent. They contacted Kevin Knuth. Kevin Knuth gave them our name. They contacted us. They were familiar with the research, and they wanted to talk to us simply because they had sightings by pilots. But and they're kind of correlated to what we were seeing out there, and we've been working with them. What is it? It's well over a year now.
About a year.
You know, I mean,
but what they did is we had that conversation with them, and they vetted what we had, and they said if we see if there's any value, we'll have analysts looking at it, and if we see there's any value, we'll get back to you. And they did. So like 2 weeks later, they got back, and apparently it had value, to whatever they're seeing or doing, if they're not sharing. But like this, they're now paying. They've been paying attention to what we're doing. Of course, we got an active collaboration, but I don't know. I'm not sure why that's not a value to what's going on in academia. It's nice to have meetings and have expensive dinners and talk. Yeah, people, speakers talk, but you have to actually do something. We have boots on the ground. We're actually doing something. We're actually collecting that data, and somebody should be looking at it. You don't just ignore it.
Right. Yeah. And we want to share it. I mean, it's not like we're all holding it and saying, you can't see our data. We're an open book. It's like we want to present it to them. Early on, the Galileo Project and its principal engineers, principal researchers, they were going to basically work side by side with us out around Moses State Park. Somewhere along the line, somebody threw a monkey wrench into it because all of a sudden they weren't interested. And this was after a conference they had. So I'm not sure what transpired, during the conference, but that whole collaboration effort disappeared overnight. I mean, they were gung-ho about getting out there, bringing out satellite systems and working with us. And we have worked with Galileo team people, they were principal research scientists out there that were out there with us gathering their own data. Well, it wasn't a collaborative effort on, with Galileo or specifically with Avi Loeb, and there's, for whatever reason, they kind of pushed back in a very big way. And, even to making a statement on Twitter, on X, about our paper. Because, in the paper, it says that, we're affiliated with Harvard University, Galileo Project, but we're independently conducting this research. Well, they didn't like the wording. They didn't like that. And they pushed back hard enough. And initially, the first response was kind of harsh. And we had to go back on and say, wait a minute, so now, so what are you saying? You're saying we're not we're not affiliates of the Galileo Project? We were still affiliates of the Galileo Project. Even to this day, if you go to their website, we're on their website, we're affiliates. But they did not want to.
Yeah, I think they didn't want to be overshadowed, and then that's where it was cut. They were Harvard University, their PhDs. They wanted to look like they had it first, or they didn't need any kind of help, I guess. So I think a lot of it was ego and being overshadowed.
The initial comment they made is that their research scientists did not agree with the processes and the methodologies that we were using to make these determinations. Look at this stuff.
Yeah, but the funny thing
they came back.
The funny thing is we were recruited as engineers to assist their engineering team who didn't have anything yet. They liked our platforms, and they were in the beginning stages. They talked about telescopes, and they said, well, you need sensor systems, you need radar, you need certain class of equipment, hyperspectral equipment to see these things. And then, of course, they loved that, and so they invited us into the Galileo Project. So we assisted their engineering team developing their platform, their fixed platform. We already had our platform.
Yeah, it was mobile. It was on that level.
And we gave presentations. We showed, the functionality. We showed what, we showed how effective it was in tracking airplanes and stuff. And we even gave a presentation after we collected data. So they knew everything we were doing, but they said in this statement on Twitter, they say, I don't know if it's a statement there, but
they said it was not sanctioned.
None of their work none of their methods and research was sanctioned by
Harvard scientists, Harvard research scientists. Then they changed the wording because everybody was either principal research people or affiliates to that research team. And we were on the research team. We were affiliates on the research team. So they changed the language and they said, well, they are affiliates of the Galileo Project, they said, and then they kind of toned down the language.
But they're not part of the research team and not really...
they're not part of the principal research team. And
they said research team.
Yeah, no, principal. They said principal research team. And they also said that...
I'll look at it.
They also said that we have no opinion one way or the other.
So, and they also said it wasn't...
So we're not going to comment on one way or another. So They kind of left them. They get, I guess it could have been damaging, if they said what they said, left it the way it was. So they never commented on any of our research. They just didn't.
Yeah, but they also said
that opinion.
In that same opinion piece, they said They said they didn't. The methods and our methods and research was not sanctioned. So they said they didn't want to confuse with their work. So that to me was a public statement distancing yourself from our work. It was kind of insulting because you didn't say congratulations on the publishing of your paper. You guys decided to distance yourself from us on our paper, even though we assisted you guys in getting your platform going. So to me, I think it's very insulting, and it's very unprofessional.
Why do you think they did that?
I think because they don't want to be overshadowed. I think it's ego, whatever,
Yeah, well, and that's the problem.
It's Harvard University.
Actually, down in Damien, you're dealing with some.
The strange is some weird politics
goes out there,
and we see that with the Soul Foundation. We saw it with Galileo, and we see it with SCU. The same thing, the same kind of thing.
SCU, yeah, exactly, yeah. Because we had, I know, we were going back and forth about the drone flap. That they
that's another thing.
They were on a podcast, and I'm not sure, who was the last guy we had podcast with?
Chris,
not Chris Lano, the other guy. Anyway, he had a podcast. He had Matthew Sadagas on, and he had Richard Hoffman on from SCU.
Oh, Reed Summers.
And they both said, there's nothing to this. Basically, there's nothing to this drone flap, that it's not connected with UAP, that this is just regular drones. They said it's not even worth the effort of examining it. And I know Matthew said a couple of things that, he says, I don't know how they determined, and he was talking about Chris Grooms at the time. He says, I don't know how he determines how far away it was, and, if you looked at some of the detail, there was references. There was references.
Well, and Grooms said that. Grooms says he used reference points. He used a building. He used a telephone pole or whatever was out there. He was using reference points. And he said that the object was probably about 60 feet away. Well, I think something that close,
he said he could have thrown a football at it.
Yeah.
He could have hit it with a foot.
But basically, all three organizations, the three think tanks, never touched this. They were stayed away from the drone flap, which to us is still UAPs because they weren't known.
Yeah, because the thing is, they didn't present as drones. They didn't really present. Basically, there were so many sightings that had some very odd characteristics that were more UAP-like than they were drone. And even for us, when we had the experience in November of 2022 for 3 weeks, we had observed what looked like drone-like vehicles out there with orbs. They were occurring together, and we're looking at the flight dynamics on these things and saying, wait a minute, they're not behaving the way drones behave. So we're odd.
We don't have a drone loiter.
We didn't have typical radar returns. We didn't have thermal returns. And this is exactly what the police department. I think it's the sheriff's department, the police department,
Ocean County Sheriff's Department,
Ocean County, New Jersey. They had a drone. They flew their drone near this object. Not only did the batteries have an issue, the battery systems discharged, but their thermal camera on this drone couldn't capture an image that had any kind of thermal differentiate. They couldn't differentiate anything within the thermal image.
You should see a thermal silhouette of something. Yeah.
Which is quite unique. I mean, we've had the same issues ourselves. Is that we'll see something on the water, and we've tried to look at it with a long wave thermal camera and saw nothing. All you see is water. So somehow this thing, unless it can disguise itself at a fraction of a degree, within a fraction of a degree of the water and the sky and everything else, which is pretty dynamic. Everything's got different temperature ranges. This thing just didn't show present itself with any thermal signature,
Which usually, if you got like an engine or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It generates heat, and there's always heat differences.
Everything generates.
And those thermal cameras are within a 1 or less than 1 degree temperature, they could see it.
Or the lack of heat.
Yeah.
Let's say the lack.
I mean, to trying to match the background is almost impossible. I mean, that's very difficult to do.
Right.
And that's what you would have to do in order not to see it.
And we've had some close observations that we look at this. So with this camera, first of all, it's got 15 times optical zoom. This the thermal camera we use, and it's an $8,000 thermal camera, and it's got really good optics. And we'll show it to you too. It's got really good optical zoom, which is a must when you're trying to analyze this stuff. Not digital zoom, but digital zoom throws away too much of the data. But we were not able to differentiate. Even at 500 meters out, we could not differentiate what that object was over the water. Couldn't see it, only in the infrared, the near infrared, not the thermal side. So, which was bizarre. And this is exactly what this sheriff's agency was saying in New Jersey. Is they're saying, the one drone operator goes, I don't understand. He goes, we have no thermal signature.
The other thing is just they didn't detect any RF signals,
no emissions, no video.
If it's remotely operated, where are the RF signals? They're not there. They didn't detect
if they're being remotely operated, you should be able to pinpoint, through triangulation, a radio direction finder should be able to see those signals. That's not difficult to do. They weren't able to do that. And some of the stuff that we've been looking at too. We have high-end spectrum analyzers at 30 gigahertz, and we can see something there, but they're transient responses. They're really, really fast-going transients. They're very narrow pulses, and there seems to be two of them. There's one at 1.79 gigahertz, and the other one at 1.81 gigahertz, which looks like it's a subdued pilot to this. This might be control signals, or it's an awareness signal. Maybe communication with other drone-like or orbs or whatnot. We don't know. But they seem to be present. We've measured a number of times.
We were suggesting a possible clock pulse.
Yeah.
Maybe it's networking between distances between different
like a maintenance pulse. It could be a maintenance signal for other objects where they, maybe it's an identifier of some sort, between objects. Maybe they identify themselves that way.
The other thing is, when we're talking RF signal, there should be sidebands. If you're transmitting information,
intelligence.
There should be intelligent, sidebands of intelligence or information off to the sides. It almost looked like a cone. And John's like, but these were narrow peaks. They're just pulses, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah.
And they're being consistent. We saw it at Gobretsky Airport where they had 4 incursions, and the last one was 17 objects were seen. And so we went out there, and of course,
What airport?
Gobretsky Airport, Francis Gobretsky Airport.
Yeah, West Hampton.
West Hampton.
Oh, okay.
It's both a military and a civilian airport. For the Coast Guard.
Yeah. So
The air wing, was it 409 or something?
So this image that you see here, this is to the two signals that we're recording, and you could see that narrow. It's a very narrow going pulse. We circled it, and the pulse itself is at 1.716 gigahertz. That seems to come up all this. That's the primary pulse. That is a secondary, which looks like it could be a pilot of some sort. It's lower. It's a subdued amplitude pulse. And it's sitting right next to it at 1.89 gigahertz. They seem to occur together, but they're, like I said, they're transitory. They're not there all the time. And you either have to put the spectrum analyzer in a pulse mode, like we use Spectran, or maximum peak mode, where every time this thing peaks out, it's going to record the maximum peak because it disappears the very next time. It's not a continuous pulse.
This is coming from one of the objects?
This is what we believe was.
We were getting it at several spots. We got them when we saw these drone-like objects because we went out in late December and 2024, and we went out January 2025 for a couple of weekends, and we were getting these signals when we saw these drone-like objects out there. We saw it at Rob Moses State Park. We saw it midway in where was on the what area in Long Island. It was not that far from Holbrook. And then we saw it again at Gobretsky Airport.
Right. So we're recording this stuff, and you could see, down along the bottom is the noise floor. That's the area where the signal is. It's so suppressed that there's you got a noise content because of the environment. So this thing is just right out of the noise floor. But look at the amplitude. That's got a really extreme amplitude. That's a big pulse, but it's a very narrow pulse. It's a very narrow going pulse. and
That's makes it on.
but it doesn't have any intelligence around it. Most of them you see it's pulse width modulated. It's pulse coded, pulse code modulation. Where you see sideband carriers like an FM signal. You did the radio station with like BLI would be 106.1. You'd have the carrier. Then you'd have intelligence on both ends of the carrier, which is your FM frequency modulation. That's your music. So they identify themselves. They put the carrier out there, and then they modulate the carrier, which is the music content or the voice or whatever that they have. This doesn't have that. We didn't see that. All we see is a carrier and a pilot next to it. Which is unusual. It's and drones. You could see drone signals. Most of the drone signals are in the megahertz, the 900 megahertz, and so forth. We have recorded one frequency out at Camp Hero out in Montauk, which was 868 megahertz.
Why do I recognize that?
Yeah, that's
Something happened over there.
Yeah, the Montauk Project. They're talking about everything from mind control to
there's a rich
time.
Was that one guy that got in trouble or something?
Yeah, there was a
young guy. Might have been.
Yeah, there was a couple. There was
A young guy who supposedly there was certain experimentation done down there with young boys.
That's their claim. That's a
They
legend.
claim there was also Terry Nichols with
Preston Nichols.
Preston Nichols would talk about
I can't remember the other two guys.
some of the experiments that were done that was related somehow to Brookhaven National Laboratory, which was basically being able to move through time. These
There's all kinds of
research projects.
The claims are kind of wild.
A lot of claims.
Well, this is what Stranger Things got.
Yes,
there.
that's right. And it was a decommissioned. Was it an Air Force station or maybe not an Air Force station?
Yeah, it was an Army. I think it was an.
Yeah, it was a watch station for World War II to look for submarines or foreign movements towards the coast of Long Island.
Right, and that radar tower was there quite a bit. I mean, it was operational for a good number.
Yeah, and they shut it down. 76? It was 80s. I forget when they shut it down.
I'm not sure. Look that up, but
we were out there.
I've obviously decommissioned, but
yeah, we were out there. And we had some weird things happen out there. The one night we had battery drains on our lights and our systems. We detected an object on that a transient object on radar, right? That appeared there momentarily. That was a large object.
That was in the early morning hours. It was like 2:00 in the morning. We had a target off of the Montauk Point, which was just about roughly about 2 miles past the lighthouse. When we had a large return out there. After a few sweeps, we could see this thing, and it actually produced an echo trail on the radar, which means that there was a solid return. The radar detected a solid return. And we had a really good reflection from it. But after the third sweep, it disappeared, and all we had was the echo return, which was the characteristic. They're characterized by the colors of the radar returns. In this case, it's white. So if it's something that's solid and produces a solid reflection, you'll see a white object out there. Basically the size, the
red, the solid red, and the white, the echo.
Yeah, the red return is actually a solid object, and what remains is the white echo.
So the motion of the object.
Yeah, so it tracks the motion of the object. So you could track these objects with motion. But it was there. We didn't see it come in. It was just there.
Yeah.
If it was an airliner, if it was a plane, but it had to have been as big as an airliner. We would have been able to track that coming in, and you'd see the echo trails coming in.
It should just disappear. That's a big object.
Well, you shouldn't just suddenly see it and then it suddenly disappears.
Yeah, especially if it's an airliner.
Yeah.
The other thing is we saw it on we have a central monitor that has it looks in the visible range and the IR range, and we saw an orb of light that was hovering near the antenna, the radar antenna out there. It was just hovering, and then it looked like it what do you call it? It bounced to different positions over the roof of the building, of that structure, and it disappeared.
And it was sudden though. It was like a ping pong ball, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a quick motion, and it looked like
Darted.
It was a white orb of light that was situated at first in front of the radar, facing us, the grid on the radar antenna, and then behind the grid. And this thing would just...
Yeah, it was in front, then it was behind.
Yeah, then it would bounce back and forth like a ping pong ball.
And of course, this was pitch black out there. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and that area is dark. There was no background light, anything, and that area faces out towards the ocean. There's nothing out there, so there was no extraneous light coming in. But it was this ball of light that was just hovering there and then started darting around and disappears.
Yeah. Now, this was caught on our night vision cameras.
But they didn't record because it shut down because of the battery drain.
As we showed, we had
there wasn't enough to record anything.
Yeah, we lost the recordings because everything shut down. Even on the back we have on the back of the RV, we have a battery operated light system, and we recharge all these batteries before we put them in. The lithium ion battery, battery packs, and we noticed the light was flashing. And it was flashing because it was discharged almost completely, which is
with the turn the lights on. So what the hell? The batteries all drained. The light flickered and went out. So it's all on our light. Tripod mounted.
The generator stalled, but when the generator stalled, we had low battery. Even the lead acid batteries on the vehicle were low. So we had the generator charges the batteries because we have a 12-volt source plus we have inverters in there. So we were able to charge up the batteries again on the RV because we couldn't start it. It was completely dead.
Yeah, we made sure we made sure everything was charged, everything ready to go, because we were taking a long trip out. Taking the RV all the way out to, the east end of Long Island or Fork.
Yeah. So this is routine. We check all the batteries charged up, ready to go.
We have videos that we tell people, here's the videos where we do self checks before we go out. The equipment's all running, everything. We do field tests out there before the equipment goes up. Before we
we go through a routine.
Yeah.
It's an initialization. We want to make sure that the equipment is operating correctly. The radar will actually go through an alignment procedure with the radar, especially with the clutter controls. Because of the climate out there, the dynamics of the weather, you have to go through that because. If you got certain wave heights, we want to be scanning so low. We don't want to have radar returns because of water. Water is highly reflective. We get that reflection back. So we want to make sure that the radar is not looking at there's sky clutter and there's ground clutter. Ground clutter is would be basically at the sea height. So we'll see that. So we adjust that level where we're just looking above the wave heights. And it's just sky. We don't want to be seeing waves, especially, because you'll see those returns. So we'll go through an alignment procedure. We'll just, we'll set up the clutter controls, the sensitivities. We'll look at the distances. We'll set that up, make sure that the noise levels are not exceptional, but we want the sensitivity to be able to detect some of that stuff. So we go through this, this religious.
Yeah, it's a methodical process. Yeah. And then we hear, of course, go back. And then we're going back to these other groups like, Avi Loeb going on to a different podcast and saying, well, their system is the only one that's calibrated. And that's not true. Our system's completely calibrated. They're going. They said they did in-house calibration. Okay. So you guys self-calibrated. I don't know. Most in our industry, the calibration is done outside, of the facility. So there's no conflicts of interest. You have calibration labs that do it, metrology labs that do it.
Yeah.
So you're doing in-house calibration. I don't know what you're using to calibrate, but you guys are signing it off. Okay. But we're getting equipment that's, in our industry, of course, you get IPC standards. There's 2 or 3 classes of electronics, class 1, 2, and 3. We're using class 2, class 3 electronics. They're high-end electronics. Make sure the optics are high end, and we get data sheets. When the industry the manufacturer who makes this equipment, they have their own test labs in there. They test the products, they calibrate the products, and then they send them out. Of course, they send them out with paperwork data, test data, and they send out what's called CFCs, certificates of compliance. So we make sure we look at all that to see if it meets our parameters and if it's calibrated, and then we'll run controls out when they're out in the field. So our equipment is calibrated. So, to make an argument or imply that we're not calibrating our equipment or it's not calibrated is it's unfounded.
Yeah, and then we don't want this to be he said, she said.
we're just trying to defend our,
We're bringing this up because it was brought up in a podcast.
we're not there to defend. Yeah.
Avi Loeb said something that wasn't true, and it was, we just sometimes we got to push back because it's,
Right.
we don't want people to think that these are things that we're ignoring, because we're not. We both come from instrument background, instrument manufacturing, and instrument calibration. So we know the processes. We're aware of what's going on. I work for Underwriters Laboratories. I was involved in some of that calibration stuff. I designed some of the equipment for the laboratory for testing and for the purposes of testing. And we're quite familiar with what is expected, for certain kinds of equipment. When you say, when somebody questions and says, well, they don't calibrate, or says, well, to even say that
And say it's off, and it's off the other groups use off the shelf equipment. That's not calibrated. No,
shelf.
And that's if you're not identifying who those groups are, you're referring to us then.
So they're saying that because they some of the stuff they put together is put together by them, so it's not off the shelf. So that would be more of a reason to calibrate.
Well, it's more risky. Yeah,
more of a reason, because it's not done under controlled manufacturing conditions.
Right.
When you buy I want to say VCR. When you buy consumer electronics, you buy commercial electronics. That stuff has been calibrated, and those parameters should meet the requirements of the piece of equipment within a certain percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it's brand new. I mean, it just doesn't come off the line and it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Which can happen. But like Gerald said, you have different classes of electronics. The first layer, the first class, consumer electronics not that great. You could have a problem.
That's your
But class 2, class 3 electronics, you should not have that problem.
Yeah.
Though they're not at that grade. So we expect that stuff to be operational. There is some equipment that we will have calibrating, just so we can look at those curves, and then we'll self-calibrate it ourselves. And just to make sure that they align with what the manufacturer said.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll send the equipment back in. We use some places that they're local, and that's highway and so forth, that are calibration shops that they'll do the calibration. But if you're saying you're self-calibrating it, you're opening yourself up to a bit of a problem. What is your expertise? Do you have calibration certs? Do you have calibration license? Have you done this before?
And a lot of times,
reasons to question it.
A lot of times when a company self-calibrates and they do that, then it has to be audited. There's internal audits that happen to make sure that you're meeting those standards. I don't know what standards that Harvard or anybody else's their engineering team is using.
Yeah.
Nobody audits their work.
Yeah, I mean they do a self-calibration process, but I'm not gonna go to
No, but they open the door when he opens the door to that argument. Okay, then we could fire back and say here's all the issues to what you just brought up. Right. You're self-calibrating. Those are issues. We could certainly bring that up as a problem.
Yeah, and as engineers, we could certainly challenge it.
Yeah,
I could easily challenge what they say they do. It's if you're calibrating something that has a magnetometer and you're calibrating it to temperature, well, that's a very small part of that calibration process. It better be more than temperature settings. It better be the magnetic flux. It better pretty much align with what's out there, and magnetic resources, magnetic standards that you were calibrating it to. So
I can tell you guys felt slighted. You came out hot.
Yeah. Because the problem is we keep watching these podcasts to listen to it and these things, and it's like diminishing. It's marginalizing our work. And after when it's over and over again, we hear it. That starts getting aggravating.
Yeah. Well, let me bring up one thing. One of the podcasts is why he we had a conversation with him, but it wasn't to be aired or anything like that. And we had talked about one of the systems that they had, and we said, well, they should have went a little bit further. They should have spent a little more money. So, and it was, I'm not going to say what it was and that sort of thing, but podcaster brought it up to Avi Loeb on the air. And he said, well, the Tedesco brothers said,
he worded it.
I said, oh, here it comes. And Avi Loeb got defensive. He got, He goes, well, I strongly disagree. And he says, look at our paper and then look at theirs, and you tell me.
Then it was just insulting. It started getting insulting.
So he went through this thing about calibration, and we said, wait, all right, I don't want to, look, it wasn't meant, to do that. I don't know why this guy,
because the Avi was claiming they have the best equipment, the most expensive and best equipment out there. And they're the only ones that have it to that level, and that's not true. The expense, we spend just as much as our equipment, but the thing is, we're engineers, so we also work on it. We put it together so we save some cost. So if you want to put cost, match the cost, our equipment would easily match what you're putting in. We efficiently spent that money. Because we're familiar with the product. The other thing is, he said something like, he's talking about the resolution. The claims that I was making, their equipment doesn't have the resolution or bandwidth that our equipment has. And that's just a fact. Because if you're using a 3 gigahertz spectrum analyzer and we're using a 26 gigahertz spectrum analyzer, that's self-explanatory. That's a better spectrum analyzer. And in resolution, if you're using one-to-one cameras, even IR, thermal cameras, and we're using a camera with a 30 times zoom, optical zoom, it's not a one-to-one camera. It's a high-end thermal camera. It's like, what was it, $9,000?
Yeah, it was a.
You're using a low resolution, whatever they're using, 640. What was it? Not 640. Their thermal camera.
It's 640 by 480 at their bosons.
Yeah,
the boson thermal.
So we could certainly. That's just a fact. If you match them up, we do have higher resolution, higher bandwidth in our stuff. It's and we're also looking in infrared. They're looking in near infrared. We're looking in shortwave infrared. Of course, they're looking long wave, but we're looking with long wave, high end systems.
Right. And this was all published. This was in the book.
It was in
the papers. We had put a list there of all our equipment. Everything was listed.
Yeah, everything's transparent.
The specifications, everything was in there. Everything was in there. So, when you say something, you really should do your homework.
Maybe you should, like I said, maybe they should read the paper. If you glanced over it, then you didn't know our paper. Read the paper first before you make an opinion or make a statement. That's what it's saying.
Yeah. And again,
it's mutual respect.
Mutual respect. It's transparency.
Yeah.
We don't want to work in silos. And unfortunately, in this research and this thing that with this these researches and whether it's academia, which are professional, people out there that are doing it, nobody seems to want to work together, and that's a major issue. There are some people that will. They do want to work, but all in all, we've had a tough time with academia.
We're a tough nut to crack. I told Avi that. You're a tough nut. Academia's been a tough nut to crack with us. We reach out to everybody. We reach out to the guys in Norway in the Hesselen Project. We talked to their research team, Erland Strand, which is a senior engineer and scientist. Mm-hmm. We talked with their entire team. We're actually sharing our technological equipment, vantage point.
And so we've had their principal. We've had the Galileo Project. And scientists out there.
We invited everybody out.
We're an open book. Come out, see us.
You're not hiding anything.
They brought out their own equipment. We worked side by side with some of their people,
And we deliberately do that. We had 2 journalists. We had the News Nation journalists out there demonstrate our equipment. We had a science journalist out there demonstrate our equipment. We had Ryan Graves out there and his team with 4 members of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics demonstrate our equipment. One was a NASA scientist. We had who else we had? We had Maya Cohen out there, an anthropologist. We had the 3 scientists from Galileo Project, Wes Waters and Kevin Knuth and Laura Demeen. And we would demonstrate our equipment, of course, and they brought some of their equipment out. But there was a 2-night demo, and we accommodated them out there.
We were an open book.
Completely open book.
They saw all our results. They saw our equipment. We didn't see theirs.
Nope, they weren't open about their equipment. It was over there. They wouldn't talk about it. Okay, don't talk about it.
There was nothing prepared for us. There was no communication. There was nothing to be shared. And that's why I said this this is the kind of thing that, if we're moving toward disclosure, we're trying to, it's tough. It's tough enough, especially, grassroots type stuff like this.
Yeah, we're just two guys in Malloy. We're struggling with this,
And of course, when you're dealing with health issues too, on top of everything else, it's tough. It's, to get to that kind of support, but, like I said, we're not hiding anything. We're open to everybody. We're open to the feds. We're open to,
Our expectation is simple. If you want mutual respect, so, if you're presenting these meetings and you're covering the latest, greatest stuff on UAP research, then you need to acknowledge what we did. You need to, and maybe a simple mention, right, which is never done.
If you looked at it and you don't agree, that's fine. Write a paper, say you don't agree. Here's what you saw and you don't agree with our results. But just don't say, you won't even look at it. And that's, I think that's a problem. It's not helping anybody. And to this day, I think they cataloged, Harvard University cataloged 500,000 objects.
Well, they just released their paper because it was after ours. They released their paper. They said they cataloged 500,000 objects that they looked at. Okay. Well, we were out there for 2 years, probably cataloged well over 1 million objects.
All 3 years.
3 years with, building the, developing the methodology and the equipment. But, you cataloged 500,000 objects, but
they wrote
nothing significant. There came out nothing significant about what you saw.
And I read the paper. I completely read their paper from cover to cover. The open, their open journal there, and a lot of it had to do with calibration. Their self-calibration, stuff like that. But I probably would have wanted to see more data. Stuff like that. But I don't think they linked anything to anything that And as they said, it either was too far away, which, part of the problem is they don't have an active radar system that, that can get this.
Well,
and that's what,
that's what they're working towards. Now they're working towards triangulation. They wanted several systems out
where the Mitch.
Right, and then they're looking at Mitch Randall for passive radar.
Passive radar, which is a good idea. It's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a useful tool.
Definitely useful.
Is it going to get the results they want? I doubt it. It looks at a wide area of the sky, but at great distances, the objects you see are going to be specks moving around.
Here's our argument. It leads to the same.
What is passive radar?
Passive radar, it's using the infrastructure that's out there. So the source is the source of the signal is radio towers. There could be satellites. I know some of the more sophisticated passive systems that I've seen is over in the UK, and some of them are really good. They're good. There's a lot of interference you have to get above and beyond. You have to have there's so much
background
algorithms that you have to be incorporated to get rid of that background noise, or clutter, I should say, ground clutter, sky clutter. Passive radar, basically, if you have an FM signal that you're using, you might have multiple sources of this FM signal, multiple towers. These towers transmit in all directions. Well, those signals, they can bounce off of objects, other objects. They can bounce off of biomass, and and depending on the wavelength, it could be really good or it could be not so good, because you're dealing with a certain wavelength. And radio waves, if it's in the megahertz, they tend to be very large. And so if you're looking at a small object, you may not see it. Mm-hmm. Same thing with biomass, small birds and stuff like that. Some of these objects we've discovered that they're anywhere between 2 and 4 meters in diameter. So they're relatively small. The drones, big as a car, sometimes smaller, at a distance, I don't know how well that would reflect some of those signals. This is all, it has to be explored, and I don't know if any systems are out there on a regular basis that you can quantify any of this stuff.
Yeah, it's more prototype
qualify.
Yeah, basically, your 2 radio towers, whatever, how many you're using, and hopefully your object comes between a broadcast of these radio towers, and it gets and you of course the signal bounces off an object that just happens to create an interference pattern.
So they're using
that's basically passive.
They're using these satellite defined their radio systems that are actually looking at these frequencies, and it looks at the primary signal, which is given out by the radio tower. Then it looks at the reflections coming back. And the reflections, by triangulation, they could see Doppler shift patterns. They see these Doppler shift patterns. And some of them can be very noisy because you're pretty much bouncing up. There's a lot of noise out there. And lower frequencies have a tendency to duct, and they can produce a lot of noise. So you got to be able to clean all that stuff up. And then it's how has it been evaluated? Has it been evaluated through an engineering? I know some universities have developed their own, but has there been an engineering house? Has there been an engineering manufacturer that has actually looked at this and said qualified that it works reasonably well, and to put those numbers, to test those numbers? It hasn't. So now you're saying you're seeing this stuff, and can that be distinguished as a plane, or is it just a random noise pulse? Is it? And if you looked at it, you'd see it's very noisy. It can be very, very noisy. I said I've seen better systems,
and you have to interpret it. It's not like you see a solid.
Everything's up to interpretation.
If something's approaching you, you'll see a dip. There's a null or a dip in the curve, right? If something's moving away from you, the curve may go up, and depending on where it is on that screen.
Well, the Doppler shift is up or down.
Yeah.
So you're seeing these Doppler changes, which is as the object moves away, if an object moving closer at a certain distance, it's going to present itself, on that Doppler pattern. We use Doppler shift with our millimeter wave radar exclusively, but we have key targets. That's an active system. That's an active Doppler system.
Because we're transmitting, yeah.
Yeah, we're transmitting our own signal. So we transmit it. We know the source. We know the reflection. We compare the two, do a Doppler shift. This is transmitted out there. It's susceptible to noise. We don't use the same restraints as active radar. Active radar, depending on whether it's S band or it's X band or it's a millimeter wave or if it's a centimeter wave, that sort of thing, which is more marine-based stuff. What can happen is that we see intermittent targets with our marine-based radar systems, which, they're made by Furuno. They're tried. They're true. They're calibrated. We can know it's a ship. It's the one target. We're not looking at other noise pulses. This was designed to send that signal out, see that target, bring it back, and display where it's supposed to be.
And it makes triangulation not as necessary.
No, triangulation is not necessary.
It's not necessary because we could transmit a signal out there, and it'll record distance from the object's distance. It'll record speed. It'll record speed. It'll record direction. It records the mass, the size of the mass, actual size of the mass. Roughly, and the mass itself. If metals reflect, they get absorbed. They get absorbed in the metal and they reflect back. Certain objects. It's not like biomass. We get reflections on biomass too. A person walking, you can get a reflection, especially on millimeter wave. A bird flying overhead, I can track that bird right across the sky with my millimeter. Yeah, we get some small objects the size of a baseball because they're smaller.
Yeah, and it's because of the frequency and the short wavelength. These are millimeter waves. They're very short wavelengths. 36 gigahertz, 24 gigahertz is what we're using. 3-mile range for the portables, and about 60-mile range for the
right. And we use the portables in case something's very small, for small objects that may be moving, and especially in motion. The XY axis radar, we have the active radar. The object that is too small to actually see it on radar.
Right. So we use, and that's something else. We use 2 scan geometries.
Mm-hmm.
We have two Furuno radars. One is scanned,
and that's proprietary,
in a horizontal X direction, which is 360 degrees around us. The other one's scanning up through the atmosphere. It's scanning almost 180 degrees, and it can go up almost 85,000 feet. So we can see some high altitude aircraft up there. We can pick it up. We get a cross section.
We get a better cross because using 2 radars transmissions at 2 different angles, so we'll get a better profile of an object.
Yeah, so
a better chance of getting it.
So if something is crossing our path, the RV is lying north to south. That scanner is moving north to south, and it's doing a rotation through the atmosphere. If an object crosses our path within a 4-mile swath, we'll be able to pick up that target. And if it's an airliner, we get a beautiful return on an airliner that's up 60,000. I mean, well, not so much airliner, but some of those high altitude flights, where it might be a military aircraft or something, they'll pick that stuff up. Getting back to what I was saying before, the same issues that we have with active radar. Now, I've heard some arguments about passive radar where they can detect UAPs where active radar can't. The jury's out on that. We don't know if they can, first of all.
It's not proving it.
These objects, if they're undergoing gravitational lensing, if there's gravidity type drives around them, where they're causing these weird propagation of signals, passive radar is going to work exactly the same way as active radar. You got a transmitting tower that's transmitting a signal. That signal may come back from a different direction. It may not come back to you at all. It may be missed. So, in order for somebody to say, well, you can get this on passive radar, but you can't get it on active radar, I think it's very premature. We don't know that. The other thing is these hyper speeds that these things travel at. Hypersonic speeds. Will it in fact return a pulse? And again, if you're talking about an object that has some kind of a distortion around it, a bubble or a gravitational bubble, you're going to be susceptible to the same effects that you have with active radar.
Right.
The same effects. If we get intermittent returns, I would guarantee you
that passive radar, we're going to have to get them.
I would be willing to bet that passive radar is doing exactly the same thing. So there's no guarantee that that's going to make any determination.
So they make the argument that that's the better model. Well, at least that's what academia is going with.
We've heard it from several different sources.
Yeah, and that's up for today. That's really up to them. That's not proven yet.
A lot has been said about passive radar, which is very, very premature. Very, very premature at this point. Look, they don't have to go passive radar. There's ways around it. The FCC has certain requirements. We have an experimental license, so we use it on land. That license is for Long Island at a certain location. We put the coordinates. That's where we're they're used along the coast systems on the coast.
Yeah,
and we can scan out over the water.
Can passive radar just be another tool?
I think it's great for another tool, another backup. So they look at a wider swath of the sky with passive radar, and we're looking at specific areas of the sky, but we're looking at it in great detail. So specific areas. The argument they had is it looks at a narrower wedge of the sky. Yeah, but it's a very detailed image of that sky, very detailed information. Where the passive radar may look at a wider swath of sky, but then, of course, that information, the further the object is, the less information you get. Unless you have some kind of rapid deployment team that can get out there and with hyperspectral cameras and get it that way.
And you're subject more towards interference than you are with active radar. Active radar is a predefined frequency with a certain pulse width. We know what the return times are. We know the timing cycles. We know this, and they work. It's coordinated. The synchronization of these signals. Passive radar is not. There are better systems, and I know some of them they use digital TV signals off the satellite. So you got a source out there, the location, which is probably a better way to go to use passive radar. But I don't think I've seen anything here in the U.S. I could be wrong. I've seen some stuff in the U.K. that I've actually seen demonstrated.
Yeah, it's not bad. That's promising.
Looks promising.
So it has its place, just not a replacement.
Right.
Yeah,
a replacement. Yeah. So for anybody to say that it is,
no,
and they're saying that it's better, and I've heard
that's what we heard.
So-called experts say it's better.
No,
look, I don't think anybody's qualified that.
No, not a especially something at a prototype stage.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly where it is. It's in the prototype stage, and I know some people are investing big money in that.
That's why they want to hype it up.
Yeah, hype it up. Yeah, right, exactly.
Be careful what you wish for. It may not be what you think.
And that's another thing. See, like I said, Mitch Randall was somebody who invited to the Soul Foundation to speak about passive radar. We're using active radar. We actually have data. So, like I said, where were we on the list? No mention, no invitation, not acknowledged.
And again, this is. We know Mitch. We like Mitch.
Mitch is great. He's a great engineer.
He's a really good engineer. We're not challenging him.
We met him in person. We talked to him in person.
We're actually we're talking more about the organizations involved, like SCU and stuff like
Right.
that, where we weren't invited.
To our leadership. Yeah.
Same thing with the Soul Foundation. We weren't invited. And
SCU's new conference, when we weren't invited to that.
yes,
We haven't been acknowledged in that, or,
I mean, and it's it's cancel culture.
Yeah, so it amounts to us as a cancel culture mentality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a shame because we all work with other groups internationally that are much more open.
Oh, yeah.
than places, facilities and academics and so forth in the U.S. We're working with other researchers out there that are open and they're transparent about their research.
Yeah, we were supposed to, as a matter of fact, we're supposed to speak to another scientist that's Dr. Andrew Morgan, who's looking, he's from Australia, but he had boots on the ground. He's using multispectral cameras, and he's seeing some of the same objects we see. And he's looking, he's an Australian researcher, and he's looking at a phenomenon called the Min lights. And there's all these throughout the world. That's something I'll talk about, and that's something like collaboration. Throughout the world, there's this phenomena of light phenomena, seeing orbs of light do weird things, not quite sure what they are. But depending on what part of the world you are, there's a whole phenomena and myth and legends surrounding those. People seeing those kinds of objects. In Australia, it's the Min lights. In Norway, it's Hessdalen lights. Here in the United States, it's the Brown Mountain lights. It's the Marfa lights. It's there's one in Louisiana. I can't remember the name offhand. What else is there?
Mardi Gras.
There's so many of them. I can't think. Oh, the Naga lights in Cambodia, but it's all over the world.
It's all over the world.
England has one too. I can't remember offhand. Again,
The nocturnal phenomenon.
it seems to be a nocturnal phenomenon. Sometimes during the day, but it's hard to see them during the day.
Yeah.
But there's a light phenomenon we're seeing, and like I said, we want to collaborate with these other groups. So let's figure out what this is.
The thing is, you can't just dismiss it, and we've heard groups just simply dismiss it. That's
Ball lightning.
It's ball lightning. It's something.
Well, what is ball lightning?
It's something in the atmosphere that we don't quite understand, but it's not UAP.
Yeah, they say it's like. Yeah, the UAP is the nuts and bolts things. I don't know what they are. You're claiming they are, or people.
Some scientists want to say, well, it's got to be it's got to be a saucer, or it's got to be a triangle, or why? Why does it got to be? Why?
And this is something, again, like I said, another scientist who we've collaborated with, Dr. Beatrice Villarroel. She doesn't like the idea like our approach. We use what's called an exclusion hypothesis. We'll eliminate all the prosaics first, and then whatever's left over is the outliers. Those are the unknowns that we want to look at. We think that's the best method because there's a lot of prosaics you have to eliminate. Is it an aircraft? Is it a drone? Is it some biomass like a bird, bats, insect swarms? Atmospheric phenomena, from ball lightning to transient luminous electrical phenomena in the air. But there's so many things, you have to eliminate that. And we think we came up with a pretty good method in doing that. I think we're the only ones doing that. But Beatrice had mentioned and she did a couple times on other programs, but a Jesse Michaels interview, that she doesn't care for the exclusion hypothesis. She says she'd rather define it down to what the object, we believe the object is, a flying saucer or a spacecraft, some kind of structured thing. The only thing is, that's to me is like, then you're using a confirmation bias. You're saying, you think that's what they are, so let's center our research about confirming that or finding evidence of a structured nuts and bolts thing. Right. We don't agree with that.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it is what we've been seeing over the last few years is again, it's this light phenomena, this nocturnal light phenomena. They present themselves sometimes very visible in the visible spectrum, infrared spectrum. They seem to move, to various different wavelengths within the electromagnetic spectrum, from UV to IR, possibly further than that, we're able to see those changing signatures. And it wasn't until the drone flap that we, people started to really recognize the fact that there is a lot going on out there. Mm-hmm. It's not just the drone-like vehicles that they're seeing. these people are talking about the orbs. This is, I'm seeing this orb and that orb. And
There's a lot of different things.
They're calling it drones.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they're calling it drones, and using the language interchangeably. It's like,
And that's not a good thing too, because we're seeing drones being used as a cover word now for UAPs, and now that makes it sound much more natural and explainable. And I don't think it's a fair term.
yeah, drones, UAV.
I think it diminishes.
These
Yeah,
unmanned aerial.
it's drones.
vehicles, unmanned aerial.
So it's safe. It's a safe term.
Yeah, and the systems might be like what they say, the bigger drones. So could it be military drones? Big, I mean, it's possible. The size of small vehicles. They fly out there for hours and that sort of thing. You tell me what drone is out there flying for hours at a time with all this weight and everything else, and makes very little sound or makes no sound, and has presents itself with no definable signatures that any other prosaic aircraft should present.
Have you guys seen the video from West Islip that these drones or discs or whatever were getting chased by Black Hawks or followed by Black Hawks?
No, I heard that one. Yeah.
A friend of mine is a cop over there. Says I can find the video, but he heard about it and he doesn't know what the fuck it is.